A Place to Belong by Carl Otto. The shadows were dancing again. Not the usual afternoon stretches and shrinks that everyone could see, but the special kind, the ones that curled like smoke and made shapes when no one else was watching. Morgan added another note in their journal. Shadow near Mrs. Peterson's mailbox, making handshapes today, maybe waving. Below it, Morgan sketched the twisting darkness with their favourite pencil, the one Sarah said made them look like a total weirdo for carrying everywhere. Mr. Licks nudged Morgan's knee with his wet nose, his one good eye fixed on the mailbox. His mangy fur was sticking up in all directions, and his tongue hung out the side of his mouth like always. Most people crossed the street when they saw him coming, this three-legged dog with his missing eye and crooked tail. But they didn't know him like Morgan did. They didn't see how gentle he was, how he left half his food for the other strays, how he somehow always knew when Morgan needed a friend. "You see them too, don't you?" Morgan whispered, scratching behind his ears. His tail thumped against the sidewalk, and the shadows by the mailbox waved faster, as if saying hello. That's when Morgan heard them coming. Sarah and her friends, their laughter echoing down the street like breaking glass. Sarah spotted Morgan first. "Oh, look, it's the freak with their ugly dog again." Morgan quickly closed their journal, but not fast enough. Tracy, Sarah's best friend, snatched it from Morgan's hands. "What are you writing about now, weirdo? More monster stories." "Give it back," Morgan said, their voice barely a whisper. Mr. Licks pressed against Morgan's leg, his fur bristling slightly. Tracy held the journal high, flipping through pages with exaggerated disgust. "Look at this! They're drawing those creepy shadows again. God, why can't you just be normal?" "They're not creepy," Morgan protested, reaching for the journal. "They're just what?" Sarah cut in, her voice sharp with the special kind of cruelty only big sisters know. "Just another reason why everyone thinks you're such a freak. Mum and Dad are talking about sending you to therapy, you know. Maybe they can fix whatever's wrong with you." Mr. Licks growled then. Not his usual playful rumble, but something deeper, older somehow. The shadows around the mailbox grew darker, stretching toward them despite the afternoon sun. Tracy must have felt something because she dropped Morgan's journal like it had burned her. Morgan grabbed it and ran, Mr. Licks keeping pace beside them on his three legs. Behind them, Sarah's voice called out, "Yeah, run away, freak! Run away with your zombie dog!" Morgan ran until their lungs burned, until the neat houses and trimmed lawns gave way to overgrown lots and forgotten places. That's when they saw it. An old playground Morgan had never noticed before, half hidden behind wild rose bushes and tall grass. The shadows here, they were different. They danced faster, more freely, making shapes Morgan had never seen before. Mr. Lick's tail started wagging, his tongue lolling out even more than usual, like he'd been waiting for Morgan to find this place. The rusted gate creaked as Morgan pushed it open, the sound echoing strangely in the still air. Inside, everything looked abandoned. A broken merry-go-round, a swing set with only one seat left, a slide covered in fallen leaves. But the shadows were alive here. They swirled around the playground equipment like dark ribbons in water, making patterns Morgan wanted to draw but knew their pencil could never capture. Mr. Licks trotted ahead, his paws leaving prints in the dirt that seemed to glow faintly before fading away. Morgan opened their journal to a fresh page, trying to sketch what they were seeing, but their hands were still shaking from running. Instead, they wrote, "Found a place where the shadows dance for real, not hiding anymore. Mr. Licks knows this place." The swing creaked, and Morgan looked up, expecting to see it moving in the wind. But there was no wind. The single seat swayed gently, like someone had just gotten up. In the sandbox nearby, patterns appeared in the sand, spirals and stars that formed and disappeared on their own. "Mr. Licks," Morgan whispered, "what is this place?" He looked at Morgan with his one good eye, and for a moment, just a moment, Morgan could have sworn they saw other eyes reflected in it, countless others, all watching. His tail wagged once and he limped toward the old slide. Morgan followed, journal clutched to their chest. The shadows seemed to follow too, dancing around Morgan's feet like curious cats. For the first time all day, Morgan didn't feel scared or alone. Here, in this forgotten playground where impossible things happened, being different didn't feel wrong. The sun was getting low when Morgan finally headed home, Mr. Licks walking beside them until they reached their street. Before he disappeared into the growing darkness, he licked Morgan's hand once, leaving a warm spot that tingled slightly. Morgan watched him go, noticing how the shadows bent around him, like they were saying goodbye too. Dinner that night was the usual mix of silence and arguing. Mum pushed her casserole around her plate while Dad talked about bills. Sarah texted under the table, only looking up to roll her eyes when Morgan reached for seconds. "At least someone appreciates my cooking," Mum said, forcing a smile. "Speaking of appreciation," Sarah said, her voice sweet in that way that always meant trouble, "guess what the freak was doing today?" "Sarah," Dad muttered in a scolding tone, not looking up from his phone. Fine, Morgan was drawing those creepy pictures again, talking to that disgusting stray dog. You really should do something about... "I told you, Mr. Licks isn't disgusting." The words burst out louder than Morgan meant them to. The shadows in the corners of the dining room stretched a little, like they were listening. "Mr. Licks?" Mum's fork clattered against her plate. "You named it! Honey, that dog could be dangerous. It looks sick and with only one eye." "He's not dangerous," Morgan said, quieter now. "He's gentle. He helps other strays. He's my friend." "Oh my God," Sarah groaned. "Can you be any more of a weirdo? No wonder nobody at school." "That's enough," Dad snapped, finally looking up. "Both of you, just... enough." Morgan pushed away from the table, their chair scraping loudly against the floor. Nobody stopped them as they fled to their room, slamming the door behind them. The shadows under the bed rippled with sympathy. Opening their journal, Morgan started a new entry. "Found somewhere special today. A place where the shadows don't hide, where being different isn't..." Morgan paused, then added, "wrong." A scratch at the window made Morgan look up. Mr. Licks sat on the branch of the old oak tree outside, his tongue hanging out in that goofy way of his. But there was something different about him now. Something in his one good eye that made Morgan think of the playground, of the patterns in the sand, of all the other kids who might need a place where they could just be themselves. He tilted his head like he was asking a question. Morgan nodded, though they weren't sure what they were agreeing to. His tail wagged once, and then he was gone, melting into the darkness like he was made of shadows himself. The next morning, Morgan took the long way to school, past Mrs. Peterson's mailbox. The shadows were quiet today, but Morgan could feel them watching. Mr. Licks wasn't around, but somehow Morgan knew he was nearby. He always was, even when he couldn't be seen. That's when Morgan noticed her. A small girl in an extra-large sweater that seemed to swallow her whole. She hunched over like she was trying to help it make her disappear. Some sixth graders were following her, laughing and pointing at her clothes. She clutched her books tighter, walking faster. A familiar shape emerged from between two houses, Mr. Licks, limping but purposeful. He crossed the street heading straight for the girl. The bullies backed off immediately. They always did when they saw him. But Mr. Licks wasn't interested in them. He fell into step beside the girl, his tongue hanging out, tail wagging gently. She didn't run. Instead, she looked at him with something like recognition in her eyes. Mr. Licks looked back at Morgan, and in that moment they understood. Morgan wasn't the first kid he'd found. They wouldn't be the last. Morgan watched as Mr. Licks guided the girl toward the overgrown lots, toward the hidden playground where the shadows danced. She followed without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for someone to show her the way. The shadows around Mrs. Peterson's mailbox swirled faster, almost excited. Morgan opened their journal, adding a new entry. "Mr. Licks found another one today. Think maybe that's what he does. Finds people who see things differently. People who need somewhere to belong." Morgan drew a quick sketch of Mr. Licks leading the girl, adding notes about the way the shadows seemed to clear a path for them. Maybe tomorrow they'd see her at the playground. Maybe she saw the shadows too, or maybe she saw something else entirely. Either way, she'd found what Morgan had. A guide to somewhere special. A place where being different wasn't just okay, but was what made you belong.